having hitchhiked back to home that was December. In January, 9 Squadron started working at Amberley, and I got my captaincy really quickly. Obviously, I was pretty pleased with that. We had a whole new bunch of guys off recent courses who had done their conversions and hadn't got up to Vietnam, and they joined us. So now we had 5 and 9 Squadron in Australia supporting the Army, and 9 Squadron developed its own set of processes and bits and pieces. We used to work heavily up towards Townsville and the Army barracks there. We did New Guinea trainers. We worked out we would have to support potentially in New Guinea, so we did that. We also did a lot of SAS support over in the west, where they'd herc an aircraft or two over to the west, and we'd do operations with SAS to keep some of those skills alive. We didn't, in that period in 72, end of 72, 73, there were some significant floods, and into 74. So I flew through till about May of 73, and there was a New Guinea push on, and I was on the list to go. I had been due for my aircrew medical on my birthday in March, and as with an awful lot of aviators, going to the doctor wasn't something you actually wanted to do. So I eventually got a phone call, and they said, if you don't come up, you won't go to New Guinea. Come up and do your medical, or you won't go to New Guinea. So I went up to do my medical, and I didn't go to New Guinea because they grounded me medically. They identified that I had a heart murmur, so they sent me off for investigation. Diagnosed as having had rheumatic heart disease, which I and my mum knew I hadn't had, but that was what the diagnosis was. So I was grounded medically, and I had fantastic support from the squadron CO and the base commander, because I got a letter that just said, "Thank you for your service. You're medically unfit. We don't need pilots. Goodbye." And I said, well, hang on a minute. I joined at 18. I don't know which way my bum's pointing outside. Can I stay in the Air Force? And after a significant argument, and I mean it was 5 months of quite intense thing, during which my wedding as planned went ahead, my first marriage and wedding and so on. So it was a quite stressful period, but I got transferred into administration as an admino, and I did 8 years as an admino, most of which I did. First stint was as the adjutant of 3AD, which is the Air Force's biggest unit at the time, and then the next 6 years was in recruiting, both in the field and selection and as a staff officer in recruiting. So that was in 73 I was grounded, but in 1980 I had a fall off the bowsprit of a yacht at the Canberra Yacht Club and bruised my hip and ended up in hospital. And when they were doing checks and they, you've got a bad heart, heart specialist had a look. He said, you've not had rheumatic heart disease, you've got a bicuspid aortic valve. And I said, what the hell does that mean? He said, nothing. He said, your heart's not enlarged or anything else. And I said, well, is that a contraindication to flying? Knowing that this particular guy was actually a Reserve Air Force specialist. I said, is there a contraindication to flying? He said, absolutely no. Not, you don't need medication, you don't need anything else. So I bid to go back flying, and took nearly 12 months. But in 1981, I got cleared to rejoin the ranks of the General Duties branch. They said, look, we'll promote you to squadron leader and admin, or if you go to General Duties and become a pilot again, you're going to have to stay a flight lieutenant for another 4 or 6 years. And I said, so you're telling me that you're going to promote me to squadron leader and give me a $300 a year pay rise, or make me stay a flight lieutenant, give me a $3,000 a year pay rise, and I go and have fun every day? Let me think about that. And back into flying. I made one of the singularly bad career decisions associated with that. Once I was told I was successful, they said, okay, we've agreed to this, now what do you want to do? And I said, well, where do you need pilots? And they said, well, we need Herc pilots and we need helicopter pilots. And I said, well, Herc pilots means I've got to work. Helicopter pilots I've done before, I take helicopters. And that led me to an immensely satisfying 8 years of flying helicopters again. But of course the helicopters then eventually went to Army, and that truncated, affected or stopped parts of my career. But I tend not to get too bitter about it, and that 8 years was fantastic fun. So I was based in Canberra. They sent me to 5 Squadron, so I did a couple of years of 5 Squadron flying. I remember walking into the Squadron CEO's office now that I'd got back flying. What they did was I had to do a re-wings test because I was rejoining the branch. So I had to go down. They made me fly the Mackie for another 40 hours down at Sale. Horrible, horrible experience. I mean, just hop in a jet and go and have fun.